Hey. Welcome, Star Family. How is everybody on this Sunday? What are we in? August 3rd, 2025. Coming up to a full moon. We have a full moon on Saturday in Capricorn. So if you have Capricorn strong in your chart, maybe your sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars should be activated. Also, of course, anything in Cancer, as that's where we have the sun and what is finishing up Mercury retrograde. So Mercury will go direct early next week, I believe on Monday of next week. So last week of Mercury retrograde. I'm curious how everyone's felt this Mercury retrograde. I gotta say, for me, it hasn't been challenging. It's actually been quite nice. I feel like I've just been able to kind of take a back seat with some things and take a little bit of time out. I did get sick, though. I did get sick, actually, earlier this week. That wasn't nice. But all in all, compared to other Mercury retrogrades, it felt pretty flowy. And did go back and redo some things, but those were pretty helpful. So curious how you all felt. I'm sure it all depends on how Mercury's influencing your personal chart. He could be squaring one of your planets or something, but he is going direct next week. So going through the chat here, let me just make sure we've got everything set up right, and please let me know if everyone can hear me and see me okay. So going through the chat, we have Erica, Alexandria, great for you to join us as always. Good afternoon, star friends, says Erica, and hopefully everyone is keeping cool in the summer heat. Rain is forecasted for the rest of the week in the southeast. Goat dreams from last week from someone, yes? So goat dreams, I think, is referring to the Capricorn energy. But great to see you, Erica. Always a pleasure to have you on. Amanda says, hi, Athen and everyone. Great to see you, Amanda. But Erica continues, depends on goat's behavior. If it's budding you denotes some enemies near. If you drink goat's milk, marriage out of money, no disappointments. Goats stand for preservation, perseverance, stubborn, and ambition. Yeah, so that's, I think, a great way of talking about this Capricorn energy. Good time to be healthfully persevering, healthfully stubborn, healthfully ambitious, really doing a status check with our ambitions and our productive energy. So again, that's going to be on Saturday. As we get closer to that, good time to check in. How is your achievement life? How is your accomplishment life? And maybe making some shifts and changes. This can actually be a great time to see some harvests, see some things come to fruition from maybe the past 6 months ago for you, even regardless of the Capricorn stuff. 6 months ago, we had the new moon in that part of the chart. Looks like we have a significant delay here. Well, it shows me live, but I haven't seen myself come live yet. So hopefully we're good. I'm just going to keep rolling. Aquarius Sky Clock, great for you to join us. Evening from Northumberland. Always great to see you, Aquarius. Thanks for joining. Bobby, hiya Athen and friends. Hiya Bobby. Have Bliss, hi souls. Hi Bliss. Hi Have Bliss. Feels good to be here on time, says Have Bliss. Oh, that's great. Great you're able to join us early here. Oh, so that's what Erica was referencing, was Anna's dream about the goats from last week. Right. The white male goats. Bobby's having a good weekend. That's very happy to hear. All in all, the astrology is not too collectively challenging. And in fact, we have quite a bit of a break from some of the stronger astrological energy until the weekend. So Monday through Thursday is no major aspects. We do have the moon going over Ophiuchus late Tuesday. Oh no, sorry. early Tuesday for most of us. Some of us miss midday on Tuesday. So that can, but this happens every month. The moon over the galactic center. But sometimes quite deep, sometimes quite transformative. So we'll see how that goes. But all in all, the early part of the week, very quiet. Then over the weekend, we got the full moon in Capricorn. We also have a kite formation involving Mars. You can see it here in the chart. It looks like a kite. We've got the grand trine, if you see the big triangle here. And then it kind of points to this point here in number 5, house 5. Looks like a kite. Fly high is the motto of the kite. And yeah, we can certainly fly high this coming weekend. Mars is in great supportive aspects, so the side of ourselves that's motivated, driven, ambitious in the sense of action, trining up to free-spirited Uranus, so becoming more of our true self, letting that out more, spontaneous, thinking outside the box, more of that true self, freedom-oriented self coming out, and trining up to Pluto, which is empowerment. So willing to face fears, willing to remove obstacles, willing to fight for what we want, what we believe in. Very supportive there. And that's the Mars opposite, so the tip of the kite will be the Saturn-Neptune. So we've been talking, I think, every live stream now about how these two planets, structured Saturn and spiritual Neptune, are together. Mars can help us cultivate this in a balanced way. So Mars is drive, Mars is ambition. So while this weekend is very good for that drive and ambition and action, balancing that out with peace, with receptivity, with going with the flow, with more spiritual energy, is I think the main way of balancing out Mars with Neptune and Saturn in Pisces. But all in all, as you can see, quite supportive. I think all in all, Mars should be quite strong in a easy way, in a supportive way this weekend. And this is all speaking to, the Uranus trining up to Pluto we have next year. So that starts August of next year. Collective energy. It's really a part of the multi-decade Pluto and Uranus cycle. So you can see Pluto is trining Uranus here. But they're not going to go exact until next year. But still, when this cycle started, it was the late 60s. And we all know what happened there with the 60s movement. Very revolutionary time for the whole world, really. And now the first phase of that cycle, the first trine of that cycle, happening in 2026, next year, this time next year. So we can see maybe some, but in this case, I think easier to flow with supportive, easier to see changes, easier to implement changes, easier to have revolutions. A lot of energy for that, actually. And if we relate that back, and let me just make sure I am live, because it's a very slow feedback. Let's take a look at when Uranus was squaring Pluto, because squares are also very important, and I can't recall when that was. So let's go. What we're looking at here is we're looking at Pluto here and Uranus here. Again, started in the late 60s when they were conjunct. They were conjunct in Leo. And that was about the self-expression at the time, but very revolutionary, really started the whole cycle between these two. And they're very, as you can see, very, very slow-moving planets here. This is over 100 years of their cycle. But let's see when they were in a square, because the squares are very integrating, very action-oriented. So let's see, if we go back to that, let me go ahead and fix this around the zodiac. So again, we're looking at Pluto. We're going to see when Pluto squared Uranus here. See when the tension was, because squares are much more about tension. It's lighter. I want to get the exact year here. I mean, it's going to be the years surrounding 2012. Wow, would you look at that? So 2012 was very transformative for me personally. I know it was very transformative for a lot of us. Am I thinking of the right cycle now? It is the Uranus Pluto from the 60s, wasn't it? No, I'm sorry, it's from the early 90s. I'm thinking of Neptune, sorry. No, it's right. No, it is the late 60s. No, it is, yeah. Yeah, so, man, that's fast. Okay, so yeah, from the late 60s. And then we had our first integration in 2012. So very interesting to think of that. Whatever the seeds that were planted in the late 60s came to their inflection point, their implementation point, their action point in 2012. And that makes total sense if you think about the 60s being about spiritual revolution and spiritual development and, you know, freedom from that sense. Because at least for me, like 2012 was really the manifestation, at least for my lifetime, my life was really the manifestation of that. And to think that 2026 is then the momentum of that, the continuation of that, the support of that. That's really cool to think. Let me know what you guys all think about that. It's very interesting. Sprout Queen, great for you to join us. Great to see you. Breaking records for heat in Florida. Clouds seem to skirt our farm, but managing the best we can. Yeah, I know Florida's usually very hot, but records, I can't even imagine. Curious if it's in the hundreds, because you know, with all the humidity in Florida, that's what makes it unbearable. Even if it's 80s in Florida with the humidity, it's like it feels like it's over 100. I can only imagine what like high 90s or even 100 would actually feel like with that humidity. Greetings, April Moore. Great for you to join us. Ace, just had a reading with Ace. Great to see you, Ace. Ace says there's a grand square in signs of all four elements made by Venus in Gemini, Mars in Virgo, Moon in Sag, and Saturn, Neptune in Pisces. All right, so we got a grand cross going on, activated by the Moon. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. This is next year, 2025. Where are we? August 3rd. So, yeah, we got the T-square there, so the Moon will form the square. So yeah, August 5th, so that's in 2 days, we'll complete the Grand Cross. So we have Mars, this is part of that Kite, but Mars opposite the Saturn, Neptune we talked about, but also squaring Venus, that's true. And then, if you know, as it does every month, squaring up to the Moon here. So yeah, it's not total exact, but you know, slight square, Grand Cross. And the strongest energy is, of course, to the opposition up to Saturn, Neptune. So that's what we're talking about with the balance, with action and inaction, proactivity and receptivity. But yeah, the Moon leaving a fucus there on, what is it? Late Tuesday, we said, yeah. And early Wednesday. Yeah, challenging maybe there that Tuesday time for personal healing, personal transformation, but very constructive. Again, very cyclical. We have this every month here. But activating the T-square might actually call on it to be a little more challenging or a little more integrative. But the Mars square Venus is, and this is what we've already had, so it's actually easing up now. In fact, it's very, very slightly a square. The Mars square Venus was last week, wasn't it? July 21st. A couple of weeks ago. Yeah, so this is definitely eased off, but it's still good to be integrating the masculine and feminine side of ourselves. We'll say the past few weeks, there's been this integration, needing to integrate the two. But at this point that it's already passed, I think we've all done that for at least the yearly cycle, so that's good. So it's definitely easier there. But thanks, Ace, for highlighting that Grand Cross there. Anna says, I have Mercury retrograde natal, and once in a while it hits, but normally not all that much. Yeah, and I've said it before, you know, if you have Mercury retrograde in your actual chart, then Mercury retrogrades, when they happen for all of us, it's actually when you'll notice things moving forward. It's a more comfortable energy for you, right? So if you're used to having Mercury retrograde in your personality, in your chart, and when Mercury actually goes retrograde, it actually feels more like things are moving forward for you. So I would suggest if anyone doesn't know if their Mercury's retrograde or not in their natal chart, Joanna, if you could put a link to the birth chart calculator down in the comment section. Joanna's moderating. My wife's moderating here today. Give a big shout out to Joanna for moderating. But she'll put the chart calculator there. Do check to see if Mercury's retrograde for you, because it's actually a big deal. And if it is, notice how when Mercury is retrograde in the sky, you probably will feel like you're coming more alive. Things are actually moving more forward for you. When Mercury's retrograde. Hey Holly, great for you to join us. Zena says, this retrograde has been very productive and enlightening for me. My natal Mercury is in a stellium with Uranus and Pluto. Okay, so typically then Mercury retrogrades would be quite innovative, quite empowering, Uranus and Pluto. But that's really great to hear that it's been easier for you. Like I said, it's been easier for me, and I'm just curious if that's more of a collective thing or more of a personal thing, but that's a +1 for it being more collective, that it's a little easier this time around. But Sprout Queen says, Mercury has had his ways here. Air conditioner needed sludge removed. Needed sludge removed from the drain pipe. Pressure switch to well pump shorted out. And those are the two biggest other minor stuff. Yeah, that sucks. That's the maintenance stuff. I did have a couple maintenance things actually. Actually, funny enough, my AC, it was very easy to fix, but my AC went out just very briefly. It just needed to be depressurized. But that's funny. I also had a air conditioner situation. I mean, Mercury's in Cancer, so it's naturally that would mean that, you know, Mercury retrograde in Cancer. Cancer represents home and personal life stuff. So it would make sense that most of us having Mercury retrograde shenanigans right now would be involving the home, possibly family. Again, it all depends on the personal chart, but collectively, generally speaking, more around home and family type of stuff. So more likely that the AC goes out than like something happens with your car, for example. Although if Cancer's in your third house of cars and Mercury's right, so it's all personal, but collectively, I haven't seen too many cars broken down on the side of the road. I always kind of check to see, you know, how many cars I can spot broken down when Mercury's retrograde. And this one, not any, I don't think. One, I think. But when Mercury's retrograde in Gemini, sometimes Sagittarius, the 6th house, these things speak more to like car things, for example. But right now, yeah, home, family stuff, the Mercury retrograde. Benjamin asks, Athens' view on Lionsgate outside of Leo. Right. So, Lionsgate is a very funny thing to me, because if you go to the mainstream astrology, they will say how the Lionsgate is the sun aligning with Sirius and whatever. But it's funny because mainstream astrology doesn't use the visible sky. But if they did, they would see that the Lionsgate is simply when the sun enters Leo in true sidereal. So this is a great example of how the mainstream, unfortunately, in my view, creates a lot of narratives that kind of are justifying things to make their system fit with what they're experiencing. The reason it's literally the Lion's Gate, and the reason the Egyptians chose this as the Lion's Gate, is because it's literally when the sun enters Leo. So I couldn't be more direct than that. Everything they're saying in the mainstream is kind of like, it's kind of like a circus, okay? If you look up at the sky during the Lion's Gate, in this case, you'll use a planetarium software because it's the sun, but you will see the sun actually entering Leo during the Lion's Gate. So it literally is the Lion's Gate, the sun entering Leo. Great question. And Anna Maria, those of you who know Anna Maria, the astrologer, she's going to do a video on that. So do stay tuned. And that reminds me, hit that notification bell on YouTube. So I think most of you are watching this on YouTube. Click that notification bell so you can be notified of these lives as well as these extra videos that like Anna Maria are making on these subjects like the Leo's Gate. But thank you, Benjamin. That's a great question. So Sledgehammer Lumberjack Library says, wondering if there's any general energy awareness recommends for friends who have birthdays in 2 days, August 5th. Let's have a look. Well, obviously it depends on their actual charts, but if we're looking at this generally, it means that their solar return chart, or the chart that's being casted here, is going to have, the houses will be different, but it's going to have this kind of energy. It's going to have Mercury retrograde. It's going to have these squares that we've been talking about. It's going to have this kite formation. So their yearly energy will be likely a year where they're going to have to, again, do kind of retrograde stuff with Mercury retrograde, at least involving the day-to-day stuff like figuring things out, going back, redoing things. It's not a horrible thing, but they'll be learning a lot. They'll be going back and taking care of things that weren't done in previous years this year. So that's really good. So a lot of it's kind of reworking, rethinking, and maybe even being unsure about what's being communicated and stuff. Maybe things involving communication and correspondence needing that extra bit of awareness. The kite is great in the solar returns, which suggests, again, the support with Mars. So for all of them, it should be very, again, assertive, direct, proactive years where that fiery or masculine side should be quite supportive. Mars will be in Virgo, though, and as it is for all of us right now, so there will be this wanting to fix things, improve things, take care of things. Depending on their exact birth date, the moon's either going to be in Ophiuchus or Sagittarius, which are both very spiritual and transformative energies. So it should be quite spiritual and transformative. Some of them might go on a lot of adventures if it's the Sagittarius folks. Adventures of the mind, adventures of travel, physical adventures, spiritual adventures. Others might be doing a lot of healing. So depends. So for those that are, let's see, depending on their location, but you're saying in Indiana, so generally, you said August 5th. Right, so most of them are going to be in Sagittarius. So most of them are going to feel the adventurous expanding of the mind, expanding of the literal horizons, expanding of spirituality with the moon in Sag. But if any are like in the morning, and it's hard to say actually, because the solar return doesn't correspond exactly with the birth date in the Gregorian calendar and the calendars we use. So I'm going to just say, half are going to be healing and transformative, half are going to be free-spirited and expanding with them in there. Outside of that, Venus and Gemini should be a lot of connections for learning, sharing, and communication. Amanda says, I have Pluto-Uranus conjunct, born in 1967. Can feel the rebirth of this energy in my life now. Oh, great to hear. Yeah, trining, I would say more supportive, momentum building, all in the context of revolution and transformation. How can we make the most of the natal retrograde, says Jenna. Great question. So retrograde will mean that a lot of your so this is if Mercury's retrograde, right? If Mercury's retrograde in your chart, if you saw that in your chart just now, a lot of your mental and communicative energies are very much mulling over and inner processes. So if you can make that more aware, the better. Because otherwise, when things are unconscious, they just kind of come through automatically. And that's why Mercury retrograde folks are known for either being very reserved or very expressive with their communications, or very reserved with their thoughts, or very expressive of their thoughts, or with their writings. So we want to be aware of it, and then channeling it in the most constructive ways. So typically, it's great for Mercury retrograde folks to do journaling. Now, this is likely not what they're going to be inclined towards. If you have Mercury retrograde, depending on the rest of your chart, you're probably not, just with the Mercury retrograde, if you're looking at in isolation, you're probably not someone who likes to journal and actually make outward your thoughts and communications in the sense of them being concrete and stuff. But either way, whether you do or not, it's very helpful, because then it's helpful for everybody, obviously, to do things like journaling. But I would say especially for Mercury retrograde folks, as it helps us become more mindful, more aware, and bring it out more to the forefront, so it's not all in the inner world. So that's the most straightforward way I would describe making the most of natal Mercury retrograde. It's a great question, Jenna. Thank you. So Sledgehammer asks, also wondering if you've ever examined the world professional tennis circuits, syncing with varying surfaces or locations, with sign types such as Earth or astronomical transits. Not tennis specifically, no. I personally, I do like to, I wouldn't say I play tennis, but I do like to hit the ball with the racket. But I haven't, but I don't watch it, and I haven't tracked it astrologically. But let me think if there's any bit of advice or just perspective I could give about it. I mean, I would imagine just like any other sport, what I would suggest, this is how I approach athletes stuff in general, is for athletes that travel the world, like, so, you're playing in another team's location, you've traveled there, or you're a tennis player playing in Wimbledon in another country, is to take the chart of the person, the athlete, and do an astrocartography reading. See what are the locations that are the most supportive in the world for the person, or check the location that they're playing at. And what we find, and this isn't just me, this is actually has been done by a lot of astrologers before, but there's an association between the location being very supportive and wins, and the location being more challenging and losses. So this is where you can really, some people get into like sports betting and stuff like this with this kind of stuff. But anyways, if you're curious, I would say that's probably the best way of looking at locations in terms of like outcomes of wins and where they're playing and things like this. Get their natal location, their natal chart. You can usually get that online. Run an astrocartography chart, which you can also do online, or if you have astrology software. That's going to show you the ley lines of the locations. Usually Venus and Jupiter lines are the most beneficial. Sun lines are very good. Mars lines are actually good for athletes. Sun. ideally you want to see how that location specifically looks, and that you want to cast the chart for that actual location. But even just a little bit of that, looking at the ley lines and see if it looks supportive or not. And that can help give you a very strong indication of what that tournament might be like. And you know, as some do, predict winners using this kind of methodology. Oh, we have another AC malfunctioning. That's hilarious. And of course, Joanna had it too, my wife, because we live together. Yeah, I should have mentioned that in the weeklies, that, you know, when Mercury's retrograde in Cancer, it tends towards home, domestic type of maintenance and stuff like this. And, you know, Mercury's air, and Cancer's water, but the home fundamentally. All right, everyone, so we'll go ahead and conclude here. Let me just take a look at some last minute questions here in the chat. Anne says, yep, needed to replace an electric stove and garbage disposal. Okay, so more home stuff, yeah. Aya, great to see you. Says, hey, Athen, how are the astrological archetypes universal? In Africa, we have many archetypes that differ from the West. Do you think it's advisable for Africans to use the same references? Well, I always recommend, and I say this for the Hindu and Indian astrologers, I always recommend staying within the system itself. So if there is an African astrological system or African system, work within that system. I'm not a big fan of, like, I mean, you can do it, like you can use parts of one system in another, but the systems already work great in and of themselves. So me personally, I always lean towards simplicity and effectiveness, and since the systems are already working, there's no point in changing them. So if there is a system there in Africa that uses, you know, these archetypes, I would say just stick within that. But from there, you can, of course, see associations. Like, you know, like I always say, the zodiac, the Western zodiac, which is what we're using, is just the cycle of life. That's all it is. And you can see the same cycle through the Chinese zodiac, for example, or any other archetypes from around the world. So, you know, you can see the associations, like whatever might be closest to Aries for the African archetypes. Maybe try to find what that is and see the associations, and that can help, you know, broaden the perspective of both systems. And then we can understand more about what that Aries-like energy is like. Well, really what the first sign energy is like, or what the beginning of the cycle, the beginning of the life cycle energy is like, by looking at those associations. So yeah, hopefully that helps. If you do know some of those archetypes, compare them with some of the Western ones, and I think you'll see an association, because I do believe all these archetypes follow the same cycle. The wheel of life is what we're all identifying. We just give different symbolism and meaning to them. But the more symbolism, the more meaning we have for each phase of the cycle, the more understanding we have of the life cycle. Oh, you're very welcome, Sledgehammer. So Patrick asks, in an aspect, do you notice their relative declinations playing a role? Like if aspecting planets are close to the same declination being more pronounced. Okay, so what Patrick's referencing here is like, when we look at an aspect, we're really looking at it from just the longitude, just from the ecliptic. It's a 2D plane. But declination tells us how far or above the planet is from the ecliptic. So, in other words, you know, higher declination, it's further up from the ecliptic, a lower declination. And so these planets are not, except for the sun, are not perfectly on the ecliptic, on this flat 2D plane. Many times they tilt, especially the moon, especially comets like Pluto. Yes, I believe Pluto's a comet. But they can have, you know, declinations, these raising and lowerings. So this is more of a 3D analysis. And yeah, so basically the further the declination is from zero, from the ecliptic, the less strong I notice it. Unless both, and this is just traditional literature, unless both planets share the same declination or close to the same declination amount. In other words, if you've got an opposition, or even any aspect, but let's say one planet's at +1, one planet's at -1 declination, roughly around there, and we're talking degrees here. Having that same, either positive, even on the same plane, 2 positive or +1, -1 degree, there's a link. So it is like a vertical aspect in that there's a connection there. So if there's a connection, yes, I find that it's a connection, makes if there is already an aspect, much stronger and more emphasized. Okay, it's not something that I normally do because usually with astrology we're looking at these 2D kind of planes, but when I want to get deeper with an aspect, absolutely, it tells us a lot about them. And hopefully one day soon, we're going to have a 3D astrological chart. In fact, we're already sort of in development of this. We're developing the online software right now, just for regular charts, which should be released here shortly. But I do see, and we've already been kind of thinking about this, I do see a very near future where we're using a 3D chart, similar to a planetarium, but it can still be a flat chart like this, but where declination is factored in. So Daniela says, hey everyone, very on point with the Mercury retrograde idea in journaling. I avoid journaling because it feels like work that is cumbersome. Yeah, that's typically how Mercury retrogrades folks will feel that. Although when I write, super fascinating things come out. When you write, super fascinating things come out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you can build a habit around that or just do that more, we find it very constructive. But thanks for confirming that, Daniela. All right, so we're going to close out here. Are relocation charts effective? When one moves, is the relocation chart more impactful? It's never more impactful than the natal chart, no, but it tells you about the location and how we're working with it. I can tell you how you're experiencing things at that location too. So in that sense, it is important, but it's not like your new personality or your new life or anything like that. The natal chart will always be playing a role. All right, everyone, so have a fantastic week. Thanks so much for tuning in. Again, do click the notification bell to be notified of these live streams, and have a great full moon, and I'll see you all next Sunday. All right, take care. Bye-bye.